Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. We have two distinct issues on today. First one has to do with the ban on TikTok and what that means for you. There's a lot of implications if it's actually banned, and you'll hear all about it. The second issue we're going to be discussing is grieving families with respect to a funeral home and how they treated their loved ones after they passed away. As you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Okay, welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. We have with us today Thomas Bosworth, who's going to be discussing the TikTok ban. Is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Who knows? But anyway, Thomas, thanks for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, tell us a little about you. Who are you?
Just a kid from a small town in Western Massachusetts. My dad was a police officer. My mom worked in restaurants, and I went on to be a lawyer. So now I represent people in catastrophic injury and death cases.
And how long have you been doing that for?
About 8 years.
8 years? Okay. So how much do you know about this TikTok issue? Because it seems to be ping-ponging back and forth on all the different networks. And it almost seems to have bipartisan support. Tell us a little bit about actually what TikTok is, because for some of the viewers, they don't even know what it means, especially in the Bronx.
Sure. Yeah. TikTok is it's a social media application. So it's a program you can have on your phone where you can create videos and watch different videos of anything in the world you can imagine, any subject area, topic, serious, funny, and it's a way for people to connect and communicate.
Is it free? Do you have to pay for it? Something else?
It's free to download, I think, and you just download it in the App Store on your iPhone, and it takes about a minute.
Okay. So what are the origins of this particular company? Where does it come from? Where did it start? United States, someplace else?
The company that owns TikTok is called ByteDance, and I don't proclaim to be an expert on the company itself, but they are based in China, and so TikTok over time has evolved to include other American-based companies. There's a company called Oracle that TikTok is affiliated with that helps to store a lot of the electronic data that exists online, and it's weird to think about data existing because it's not like a physical thing, but there's companies that actually store this data. So the company's evolved quite a bit.
So where is most of the data stored? In China, in the United States companies, or just both?
I honestly don't know the answer to that, so I don't want to get in trouble and say one thing or the other, but I know that according to TikTok, they made a huge push when this pressure started, so to speak, this pressure to get rid of TikTok or basically make TikTok a domestic American company. I know that they affiliated with Oracle and launched something called the Texas Project, where they say that, I don't know if they say all of their data, but I think most, if not all, their data is now stored and protected in the United States.
When did it start, this TikTok, to begin with? What's the origin?
I don't know the year it started. I am in TikTok years. I'm probably elderly because I'm 35. So
Right.
a lot of the I'm like an elder statesman or something. But a lot of the folks on TikTok are I've seen a lot of young kids on there. But there's it's all ages really.
All right. So what's the problem? Why is everybody up in arms about this social media platform? I mean, we have Instagram, we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have so many that nobody seems to be as angry about. Why this one? Why this platform?
Well, if I were a member of Congress, I would answer in a way that I think they want the American public to think about this, which is a national security threat. They've been the rally cry from the politicians has been, this is a Chinese company. It's dangerous to national security because they could take our data or information and sell it to the Chinese government or give it to the Chinese government. And I've heard different iterations of what that would look like. They've claimed that they could interfere with American elections. Now, of course, social media is wrought with material that's false, material that's legitimate, not just TikTok, on Instagram, Facebook, yada yada yada. So I think if you're asking me as a person what I think there's a little bit more to it behind the scenes that we probably don't know about. If you think about TikTok, there are 170 billion users in the United States. It's continuing to eat up the market share that has previously been dominated by companies like Facebook and Instagram. I can't imagine that they're thrilled about that, but I've never actually seen or heard any supportable, bona fide evidence to suggest that TikTok's actually misusing data and affiliating with the Chinese government.
By the way, these other platforms, you mentioned Facebook, let's say Twitter, Instagram. What happens to their data? Where is that stored?
God only knows. I mean, there's problems with every social media application. There are issues with with social media inherently. And I think what a lot of people realize that use TikTok or that care about the issue is, if you want to have reform, that's great. And if you want to employ safeguards, that's great. But a total ban is not only impractical, but also unconstitutional, in my opinion.
Why? Why do you say it's unconstitutional?
A couple different reasons. Number one, it infringes upon the not only the First Amendment rights of the users of TikTok who come to this platform to express their views and express themselves. It takes away that medium, right? And the United States Supreme Court has already referred to social media as basically the modern day public square. Whereas in the 1800s, you had the actual public square. Now it's social media. So you're removing one of those arenas from people who rely upon it. Secondly, there's issues involving economic liberty, and I don't know if you want to characterize it as a takings, but you're forcing a company to sell itself, which is, in my view, problematic on a whole lot of different levels, and frankly, un-American. The company being targeted is, of course, Chinese, and so I think the argument's cut both ways on that. The proponents of the ban would say, well, all the more reason it needs to be banned. We can't have foreign adversaries. But constitutional scholars, I've heard talk about the fact that could be discriminatory and a slippery slope if we're targeting one company more than others, and particularly if we're targeting someone based on national origin or ethnicity.
Well, what evidence do we have that the Chinese government is privy to this information that is stored by TikTok?
I've seen zero evidence of that. Congress has alluded to it vaguely, but no politician that I'm aware of has ever actually cited to any evidence or proof. And what will be interesting in the weeks and months to come is that if this case plays out in the court system, which I suspect it will, I suspect TikTok will challenge this. At that point, the government, the proponents of the law, they'll be required to come forth with that evidence to meet their burden of proving that the law is constitutional. So I am curious to see what that looks like, but because I don't think the hypothetical scenario of, well, this could happen and then this and then this and then this could, I don't think that passes constitutional muster.
So I can, force you to tell me, what you think is going to happen, or put a crystal ball in front of you, but where do you see us 6 months down the road?
I think that 6 months down the road, the case will be postured in the federal appellate court system, or already before the Supreme Court of the United States, who's going to have to make the call on this. I think that if the law were to go into effect, I don't think if the law were to go into effect, that wouldn't happen until after the next presidential election. I do find it a little bit ironic that President Biden he's the one who signed this into law, yet he has employed his own TikTok page to try to get votes. And then, so, I'm not an expert in politics, but I think that's a little bit ironic. I think that the case I think it will be deemed unconstitutional by the United States Supreme Court.
Well, let me ask you a question. Former President Trump has also advocated banning TikTok. It's one of the few things that he and President Biden actually agree on. You have two of the most important politicians in the world banding together. It's kind of tough to fight that. I mean, you got both leaders of both parties. So what are your thoughts, and what would be able to fight it? Other than interviews like this, what else? What could stir the tide?
But with all due respect to President Biden and former President Trump, I think there's a huge generational divide here, and I think that there's a detachment from the modern society that most of us are living in. Mr. Trump and President Biden are no spring chicken and I don't mean that in a negative way, because there is value to our elders and there is value to being older and having more life experience. But, we're not talking about a rinky dink little sect of the population here. TikTok is huge. And as somebody who has a decent amount of followers, I'm seeing more diversity in the age group on there. I'm seeing folks who are in their 50s, 60s, 70s even on there. So I think politicians often get things wrong, and I think that the only way that they can realize they're wrong is from hearing from their constituency, and I think there's been quite an uproar in response to this.
How do you use TikTok personally? Do you use it for your business at all, or do you just use it for personal reasons? How do you use it?
So my wife back in August 2022 was like, "You should do a law TikTok," and I was like, "Why? Nobody's going to listen to that. That's boring." And she's like, "No, seriously, do it." I did it. And then, sure enough, people started watching my videos. So I really like to do informational videos that talk about some of the topics that I encounter as a civil litigator going up against big corporations. I think that information is useful to people. I don't do it to get business or to get cases. Coincidentally, people reach out to me and do sometimes ask me to represent them. So I've gotten cases that way, but I think it's a great tool to spread information.
All right, we're going to leave it there, Thomas. I'm going to thank you very much. We could debate this for the next 25 minutes.
Yeah, I'm sure we could.
But maybe you can come back in the next couple of months and let's see where it all lands. How's that?
I appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thank you for interviewing me. Appreciate it.
It's our pleasure.
Okay.
Stay with us. Today's Verdict has so much more coming up right after this. Hey, welcome back to Today's Verdict. Bronx Net reporter Chris Kumela was recently up in Albany talking about animal advocates unite at the state capitol. Let's take a look at the video.
To kick things off this week at the New York State Capitol in Albany. Here at the Legislative Office Building, animal rights advocates and organizations are convening to urge their state lawmakers to pass legislation that will protect animals and ensure their well-being. A gathering of advocates, nonprofits, and hospitals are participating in another installment of the state capitol's annual Animal Advocacy Day. The scene is set with displays of vendors from across the state, each sharing their vital work in supporting animals and promoting welfare initiatives. Through the hallways, esteemed organizations like the ASPCA, Cornell Veterinary Hospital, and more are showcasing their dedication to animal care and expressing what makes their work and companions so worthwhile.
To have a place to have these guys isn't easy. They have such a deep soul. You look into their eyes and it's just, they're so empathetic with people.
Now, New York State Animal Advocacy Day is already sponsored by 2 senators and 2 assembly members. However, by the end of today, organizations and advocacy groups are hoping to get more people on board. Passerbys engage with vendors learning about the crucial work being done to protect and support wild and domesticated animals across the state. New York Senator Michelle Hinchy, a passionate animal lover and champion of animal welfare bills, is one of 2 co-sponsors for this event.
We're very focused on making sure that we have a legislature that is pro supporting our furry friends and making sure that all of our animals are protected across the state.
Her commitment to creating legislation that prioritizes animal well-being is evident in her efforts to push vital bills, which Senator Hinchey is optimistic about securing a unanimous vote in favor for. One such bill focuses on preventing animals from being left behind during home moves, a heart-wrenching issue that often goes unnoticed. The atmosphere is vibrant with a sense of unity and purpose among those in attendance today. A potent reminder that animals deserve care, compassion, and protection just as much as people do.
There has to be a mindful balance, in my opinion, between what people need for their society and what's overdevelopment and not cautious planning so that they don't interrupt wildlife.
Reporting from BronxNet, I'm Chris Cumella.
All right, Chris, thanks for the report. We have to take a quick break, but when we come back, more Today's Verdict right after this. Okay, welcome back to Today's Verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney David Lesh. We have joining us today Melissa Yashan. I'm saying it the right way, right, Melissa?
You are. Thank you.
Okay, the Deputy General Counsel at the New York City Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. Thanks for being here today. Tell us a little bit about you.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
I have been here at New York City DCWP, the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection, for just over a year and a half at this point. And I've really enjoyed really jumping in right away, hitting the ground running, and working on some really critical and important investigations as well as policy issues in order to protect and uplift New York City's most vulnerable communities, who tend to be the victims of scams and often fall prey to exploitative business practices across the spectrum, of which we have a lot here in New York City.
You know, we've had people from the Consumer and Worker Protection on before, and I find that it takes years sometimes from when you first made aware of something that's improperly done to the check finally getting mailed or something ends up happening to the entity. Why does that happen? If you could maybe tell me.
Well, I'm assuming you're a litigator, and
Yes.
so you know that most civil litigation, at least, usually does take a very long time. Our work is, my previous life as an attorney, I was a community lawyer. I worked for a nonprofit. I did impact litigation and class action work, amongst other work that I've done in my career. But I like to think that I've brought that sensibility to the work that we do here at DCWP. We are consumer complaint driven. So we always have our ear to the ground to track and identify patterns of complaints that are coming in from consumers from the city of New York. So when we start hearing about some concerning behavior over and over, that is when the lawyers at the agency get involved and commence an investigation.
And how do you hear about it? Is it social media related?
No,
Do they
so
get phone?
we have a consumer services department. We have a consumer services unit that actually is within the general counsel's division. So they do the intake of consumers. Any consumer who has a complaint about any business in the city of New York can either go to our website and through our portal submit a complaint, or they can call our hotline or even go through 311. And our consumer services division, they take in those complaints and they will try to mediate it. They will try to make the consumer whole by reaching out to the business. So sometimes it won't even get to the attorneys. However, like I said, when we start seeing repeat bad actors, consumers complaining about the same company, the same entity, the same bodega, the same taxi company, the same used car dealership, we then commence an investigation, and it's in partnership and cooperation with these consumers who are the complainants.
All right, let's talk a little bit about R.G. Ortiz Funeral Home, which I see throughout the city. Tell me a little bit about this business.
So we actually do regulate funeral home service providers. That is within the auspices of DCWP, formerly DCA. And of course, it is because These sorts of businesses are exactly the type to prey on people when they're going through the most difficult times of their lives. And we have, under the consumer protection law, we have very strict laws about what these funeral service providers can and cannot do. And we also have rules that dictate and govern their behavior, because the idea is to make things easier for consumers who are finding themselves having to say goodbye to a loved one, not more difficult. And that is why we have these laws and rules. When we started receiving complaints about R.G Ortiz, of course, there was an uptick during the pandemic. And of course, we tried to mediate, and we didn't want to penalize any business for having their hands full during the pandemic, especially funeral home and service providers, because of what the city was going through. However, about a year ago, as we began to emerge into this post-pandemic economic recovery period, we still were getting the same sort of troubling complaints about R.G Ortiz in particular. They are our single highest complaint getter in terms of the funeral home service providers. And that is when we began reaching out to the consumers. We also looked at other government agencies who receive consumer complaints to see if they too were receiving the same high number of complaints about R.G Ortiz, which they were. And that is, the Better Business Bureau or the Federal Trade Commission. And that is how we initiated our investigation. And we, of course, if you read the petition, which we filed with the Office of Administrative Trials and Hearings, or OATH, we detail our undercover work as well, which we have investigators and inspectors who did some undercover work to confirm that these—
Tell us about that. How do you do undercover work at a funeral home?
So we have an investigator who visited a number of funeral homes, and also another inspector who visited a number of funeral homes to make inspections. So the inspections aren't always undercover. The inspections are done to see if they're complying with our rules, such as putting up a price list for transparency and disclosures to consumers so they know what they're getting into. And again, to make this easier for them, not more complicated, not more opaque, but more transparent. But our undercover work, we have an investigator who called posing as somebody who had just lost a family member and asking for specifics about the various services that they could provide, the timeline, and of course the cost. And as is detailed in the petition, the responses varied wildly to a somewhat uniform inquiry, which of course displays a violation of the law, a violation of the requirement to be transparent about pricing, and a willingness and appetite on the part of R.G Ortiz to use their own discretion to take advantage of consumers willy-nilly by their own whims.
I read some of the misrepresentations of time it would take to return cremated remains, mishandling of misplacement of remains, forcing consumers to sift through the remains of cremated individuals. It's appalling.
It's the stuff of nightmares, really, both, from a horror movie perspective in terms of some of the descriptions of the condition that bodies were in when loved ones went to pay their final respects.
Now, how do you find out about that? Do they take pictures of the loved ones? Do they just tell you under oath that the
Yes.
loved ones look like a certain way and they had to put lipstick on themselves or do something like that? I mean, how do you find that out?
And as we all know, trauma burns deep in our brains, right?
Yeah.
So having to apply makeup and hairspray to your grandmother who has been dead for days, I believe would stand out in your head, as would seeing your son's waxy makeup melting off his face while an odor is emanating from his body and flies are buzzing around. I mean, that's the stuff that Stephen King writes about, but not that we as a city consumer protection agency expect to have to receive and get involved in. And that also is why, again, we didn't just try to mediate these individual complaints one-on-one, but we undertook the effort in our legal division to really bring a case and seek full restitution for these consumers, as well as other consumers who aren't named in the complaint, but who also were wronged or harmed by R.G Ortiz and should reach out to us, and we will continue to work on their behalf as well.
Well, what are you looking for to come out of this? Is it monetary compensation? Just what exactly is the end game here with respect to R period, G period?
Our primary goal is always to hold the bad actor accountable and make the consumers whole. So to the extent that we can't bring back these people's loved ones and have a redo of that formal goodbye that is a funeral, we can't do that. But we can certainly try to get whatever profits were made off of the conduct that was exploitative back into the hands of those families. We also can hold accountable the people who did prey on and exploit the consumers when they were at their most vulnerable by enforcing the law and administering penalties. And our penalties under our consumer protection law, which was amended for the first time in half a decade, 2 years ago, to increase those penalties, they can rack up. So with more stories that we are hearing, and we have already heard from additional consumers in the last week, with more stories that we are hearing, you can bet these penalties will start to rack up.
By the way, is this a family business, something else? I mean, who's running R.G Funeral Home?
You should ask them. To the extent that we get that information in the near future, happy to come back on and tell you what we know. But as of right now, I don't know what the R and the G stand for. I don't know who runs it. It is one entity with 8 different locations throughout the 5 boroughs.
Well, I assume with Discovery, you'll find all those things out. And hopefully you can rejoin us maybe in the next couple of months and tell us what you found out, if that's okay.
Yeah, I would be happy to.
All right. Well, I want to thank you very much for being on. But we have to take a quick break. So stay with us. Today's Verdict comes back right after this.
I remember when the Bronx did not really have a media outlet properly representing the people of the Bronx.
BronxNet provides for the community by being a community where people can be empowered to share their voices.
We are in a really great place technologically. We've got all the resources that we need to be effective.
Whether it's through cameras, storytelling, editing, we have provided those services for 30 years.
BronxNet's mission is to be a voice for the community.
To educate, to inform, and to inspire.
And you can be a part of it. We've built studios for you.
Okay, well, that's all we have for today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue or a topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to email me at davidlesh@bronxnet.org. I'll see you in 2 weeks. Have a great couple of days.